Good morning, United Kingdom. Good morning. Good morning, and we're nearly at the end of 2021. So, good morning to everyone this wonderful morning. We don't have Lakhi Singh, unfortunately. I think he's off delivering presents to the children of the world or something like that. So we don't have him, but the conversation is interesting. Conversation is, what should I do if I know somebody who has a debt problem? Well, in this very, very difficult year where businesses, individuals, people are suffering, I think first and foremost, we should wish everyone a wonderful new year. And we hope that the new year is full of changes that are better for everyone. And we'd hate to say a change that's going to make it worse for someone. So yeah, so we make a change, we're making the change, and we're doing it with the hope that people's lives get better. So what do you do if you have someone you know has a debt problem? That's a question. It's very difficult in a time where you have expectations on you. You've got the new year coming in. You have to keep up appearances, you have to keep happy, smiling. And a lot of people are suffering within because they have these demons in their closet, as you want to call them, or debts which keep niggling them in the background. And with the COVID situation, I think a lot of people probably want to feel comfort that, well, actually there's a virus around and therefore the banks aren't going to chase me. So the first and foremost thing is understanding the psychology of the person. You want to help someone who has debt issues. The first and foremost thing is to understand their psychology. What is it that motivates them? What is it that holds them back from sharing this most valuable bit of information, that they are in debt problems? Sometimes it becomes very difficult for somebody to acknowledge things which are open and apparent because of the stigma it'll cause them. So then we need to be very sure how the individual thinks about debt, what he thinks about it, how open is he? If it's someone close, are they sharing that information with you? Are you being made a party or subject to those feelings that they're going through, or is it just merely a mathematical equation you've been given that they are, out of pocket and they need money, solve certain problems? Have they borrowed money from you? That could be another circumstance. If somebody actually has borrowed money from you and you know that they're in problems because they borrowed the money from you and they've not been able to return it. Some people would say it's probably better to let them be at their own. They created the mess, let them sort it out. Others may have a different opinion. But ultimately, there is an angle on debt, that requires people to acknowledge that there is a psychological impact when people are in debt. And that psychological impact can affect their ability to work, to focus on work, to be a productive member of society. I mean, it can even cause depression, severe depression. When a person you know has debt problems. Let's first classify debt problems. Well, an individual accumulates debt once they borrow money without planning. Perfect example is somebody needs to do an extension to their house. They need £100,000. They borrowed a bit from friends, taken a bit out of savings, taken a bit from the bank. Accumulatively, they've taken out 100,000. But the cost of that project starts to increase, and now it's about 120,000. It is quite obvious it's going to be difficult for them to go out and get money again. So this type of debt you could call trading debt, but remember it's been spent on a house, a home, their personal house, and therefore that particular type of debt should have been calculated. So there should have been quotations given. There should have been a project management chart or a sheet, or at least a budgeting sheet as to how much each phase of that extension cost. So the fault lies with mismanagement of money, and then not actually regarding the repayment of that money to be important in that process. So when you're taking out large amounts of money, obviously you must be aware that money is not being given to anyone for free. And if you take money from someone, you must realize that that person, is expecting that money to be paid back, unless the terms have been set out, and that's money that you are owed, or that money has been given to you because of inheritance or something. Otherwise, debt and the accumulation of debt happens when the person taking the debt on has not calculated the basic repayment or the ability to repay by doing something that takes the burden back off the lender and puts it back to the borrower. Typical example, you've taken out a mortgage, the property isn't worth what you thought it was. You bought it for £100,000. The asset now has devalued because of a market force. This is debt which is slightly more complicated. Why? The control of the value of that asset is not in your hands. And if the market forces devalue that asset because of their own understandings, the impact it has on you is indirect, but it's direct in terms of repayment of those monies. So in those circumstances, I think people normally get distressed more because they are not in control of the value of the debt and the value of the assets that the debt has been secured on. Now we know there's two types of debt. One is secured, which is mortgages or taking out loans where there's a security against an asset of any kind. And the second is unsecured. Now the secured one is the one that at least guarantees the lender some rights of recovery, whereas the unsecured one is slightly less in the favor of the lender, slightly more in the favor of the borrower. But either way, the monies have to be paid back, and therefore people accumulate debt. Similar circumstances are in credit cards. When people take credit cards on, they're basically taking on a debt that has been digitally created, a digital debt. So the debt isn't really off a balance sheet, but it's an amount of money that the bank is allocating to pledge against people's spending, knowing that that card will be repaid by people's incomes or their cash or their reserve funds. Now, irrespective of the fact that the money for the bank has been taken from an electronic sump, it still puts the onus back on the credit card holder to pay that money back. And that is where the problem lies, that ultimately you have to know that when you spend money, you are required to pay that money back. Now, debt and the accumulation of debt happens at every level. So it's people at the lowest level, people running shops and businesses, and then at the highest level, large corporations, projects. The difference being when it's larger money, money normally is taken from the markets. The markets will give you money based upon your value or the share value of your company. Now, either way, you are raising money for something and you're using credentials. And that's why in debt, the term credit file or credit rating is extremely important. Lots of people who are in business have to be very mindful of keeping their credit score in check. Although we advise that everyone should always be aware of their credit file, so they can always be checking where the credit file is going at any one time, but nonetheless, it is more prevalent for commercial lending because it could be the difference between a company getting $1 million and a few million. And risk assessment or credit file rating for corporations also takes place. Risk assessment or credit files of companies are made by companies' track record, history, their balance sheets, their annual returns. So they check all the information to see how credible the company is, who the owners are, what type of monies they have in their bank and what type of business they do. I think during COVID, most all of that would have been blown away because everybody's high risk because there's no business. And I'm not sure what they've done for that. Something we could check up as to how they realign the credit file ratings whilst lockdowns went on. Because most companies weren't trading, and if they were probably relying on the bounce backs or the symbol loans to keep on trading. How much of an impact would have that had on the company and its rating? We'll probably research into that and give you some feedback. So we move on to helping people who have debt problems. Now, in this present environment, I think it's going to be quite probable everybody coming to that New Year's party is going to have some issue or not. The question is, how do you gain confidence of a person you know who will take your advice? How can you help them in that way? Well, one of the first things we know about debt problems is that it has a humongous psychology on the debtor, to the extent that they will clamor in, they will become somewhat introvert, and they will wish away the problem, which is not going to get wished away. Second thing in debt is that the psychology debt collection is a tremendous psychological effect on people who are trying to, in their best endeavors, to manage their money. The feeling that somebody can come at your door and ask you for £100,000, knowing that you don't have it in your back pocket, but yet putting you under that pressure that they've served you a notice, can be very traumatic. And I think in some respects it's ridiculous that once the banks do that, they write a letter saying, oh, we want you to pay your money back in 14 days, 1.6 million. Even for them to write it to a debtor, knowing that the person's taken a mortgage out to have that money, knowing that the asset is still with them, knowing that the markets have fluctuated, not because the debtor's made any errors in his judgment, but because the market's been disrupted. Very difficult. Next to impossible. And individual people can start feeling the stress of debt by becoming ill or other. I think more than anything else, it's important that you are aware of their psychological condition. Teaching them how to go back to basics, how to look after their own health, how to look at their overall day, weekly, monthly management routine of money, and to start reallocating money to pay down the important debts. So this goes on to another topic, prioritizing in your debt. Obviously, if you've got 10 creditors, they can't all be paid at the same time. Can't all be paid at the same time. They can't all be wanting the money as well at the same time. Debts must be prioritized. How do you prioritize debt? Well, you look at the most important one, the one that will lead to more problems, knock-on effects. A lot of clients we have come to us and we tell them that, you know, you're going to lose your license because of the fact that you've been made bankrupt or you go on an IVA, then really you need to be clear, do you want to continue practicing for that time? You may have to lose the license, but have the freedom to do what you want in dealing with your debt problems. So definitely. So I'm going to do a quick last summary of everything. This is just a very small glimpse of debt and what it does and what it entails. So we covered the various type of debts. We have secured, unsecured, and both debts have different implications. Remember, the application of a secured and unsecured debt has different connotations to the lender, how they can recover their money. When you have collateral charges or legal charges across assets, it gives strength to the lender. Once it's unsecured, it becomes slightly more in favor of the borrower. But then the amounts of money are different. You can't expect to be taking out £100,000 credit card, overdraft, or whatever without security. But at the same time, there's lots of funny things that happen in the banking system where somebody who's got a VIP status, is a well-known, you know, footballer or sports star or somebody who's in the limelight in the public, they can be given silly money by the banks because of who they are. Well, if that be the case, then where does the credit file go? And where does the knowledge that the person who may be a VIP, it's not assured that person is good at money management. So I think the banks do play the system somewhat against the individual's fame, and fame itself gives you credit. I remember once I think it was a famous interview by Mr. Bashir of Michael Jackson, and he was walking around, and I think literally in the one meeting, he spent just under $500,000 buying various artifacts and fancy ornaments. Now, even that has an impact on his credit. But because he's famous, all rules are thrown out of the window. So if you want to have exceptional credit line, become famous. That's the quick, short rule of it. But if you want to be just like everybody else, normal, ordinary, I think it's very important that when you try to give support to somebody who's got a debt problem, you must try to be extremely pragmatic in your approach and not be emotionally drawn in to the impact it has on that family or house, because that is something that nobody else apart from the debtor can actually absorb. And giving them support and giving them comfort is the best you can do. People have a habit of finding their way through things. And I think the rule should be that we support and help, but we should not indulge. We should not direct anybody who's in debt problems. Why? Only they know what is important in their life. You know, certain circumstances where people are getting their children married. You know, certain cultures, certain in this ethnicity, marrying the daughter is a parental responsibility. There's a lot of money being spent on those marriages. They may bear the pressure of more money taken on to make sure that the function is as good as it can be. Nevertheless, all matters put aside, we should be very clear in how those matters are dealt with by debtors. Now, once you've gained the comfort of your friend or family member who's in debt, you really need to be referring them to specialists, people who understand the implications of debt, what could and could not happen. You should be looking at, obviously, alternative sources of funding where the individual's got bad credit, but money can be obtained. Now, the worst situation you can get yourself in is to take good money and throw it after bad money. It's not always a good rule. People like to have that feeling of, I've got another 6 months now to pay the debt back. But ultimately, you are going to end up at 6 months not having any money available to pay the original debt off. So being pragmatic is extremely important. Learning to talk to the lender, picking the phone up and talking to the lender openly is very important because it allows the lender to recognize that you are in contact and you have realization of their debt. Once debtors start putting the screens down, fail to communicate, what happens then is that the creditors get nervous. And in order to avoid nervousness, good communication is an excellent tool to use because it gives all parties confidence that everyone's on the same page and there's a recognition of the debt. I think we're in the last 2 minutes, obviously, of today. We're only running a half an hour because we don't have Mr. Singh. And that is, I think everyone should have a look at helping their friends and family over the New Year's and coming into the new year knowing there's more uncertainty, with true affection and responsibility. So to summarize today, I will say debt and debt problems and helping friends who are in debt is a very, very important thing. It's a very difficult thing, an important thing that you could do for your family member or your friend. So over the new year, this holiday period that you do have, some of you will be at work, some of you will not. I think the good thing to do is look at debt and look at your family and friends, people who are in difficulty, somehow try to give them a better support. And it's a better support. It doesn't need you to be the governor of the Bank of England to come out with a briefcase of money. What it does do is it just requires you to have that holding hand, which is vital for people who are struggling with debt. And with that, I'm going to say good morning to everyone. I hope you enjoyed this little session. We're in a one-to-one, quiet one. We've not had the fever of Mr. Singh on, who provides a lot of knowledge and in-depth thinking. But nevertheless, we shall see you again next year, where we're going to change the format slightly and make it an hour and a half presentation every Monday, where we'll try to attempt to discuss all the topics that are important to people that we are talking to. Take care. See you next year. And we will hopefully see you in around, I think, the 11th of January. Is that right? 11th of January. Take care. Speak soon.